All right, just finished up reading book 2 of the Wheel of Time series. It's called The Great Hunt. You've probably read it. If you haven't, be careful because some of the information I'm going to talk about might be a spoiler to you. All right. Anyway, so this book starts off approximately a month or two after the first book ends, and everybody is still up in the borderlands. Rand is contemplating his future. He just learned that he is the Dragon Reborn. This is something he doesn't want to be. He denies it. He wants to run away and kind of live in isolation so he doesn't have to channel and hurt anybody. So there's a great deal of fear and apprehension about his future. Perrin, he's kind of being quiet and brooding. He's trying to grasp the fact that he can talk with wolves. He's emotionally working through it, and he's coming to terms with that. And Matt, he's part of the trio, but we're not too sure how he fits in, though he's considered an integral part to the Dragon Reborn, because he's a Taveran, I think it's called. Anyway, Matt's kind of there as a comic relief at this point. He's a young, immature guy, even more immature than Perrin and Rand at this point. But anyway, the big problem happens. The Horn of Valere, the horn that calls heroes back from the dead, it gets stolen right out from Lord Agomar's vault. And sure enough, there is traitors in the mist, dark friends as they call them. So there's people that are acting in direct opposition to the White Tower and its objectives, and of course Rand and his objectives, whatever those might be. So the Amyrlin Seed, who shows up, she's a new character that we meet in this book. She was mentioned in the first book, but we actually get to meet her in this book. She charges Lord Agomar with creating a posse, creating a gang, these guys to go after the Horn of Valere and bring it back. It's his duty to bring it back. So he's really upset. He's bending over backwards with the Amyrlin Seed to try and apologize, and the Amyrlin Seed's like, just go get the horn, get it back. I'm going back to Tar Valon. But anyway, through this journey that Rand, Perrin, and Matt take to recover the Horn of Valere, they start to discover more about themselves. And surely each of these characters is flawed. However, Rand, some interesting things happen to him, I think, because he's quoted as saying, I think it's on page 199 in my book, he says that, there's a lot of things to be fearful of in this world, but every once in a while something nice comes along, and I'm not as afraid of the future. I'm kind of paraphrasing there. So, Randy's living with all this great fear, but then he starts to realize that he doesn't have to be afraid of everything, that he has, partial control of his own destiny, and that's kind of contrary to what we've been told in the first book, that there's this great pattern that weaves the lives of men and women, and each person has a role to play. But at the same time, there's freedom within that pattern, and Rand is starting to kind of see that, and he's starting to feel a little bit better about himself. Of course, the end of the book culminates with everybody bowing down before him in his camp, and he has to decide if he is going to lead these men and accept them into his service or not. Now, the book doesn't explicitly say what happens, it just says that he makes his decision. Of course, since it's a 13-book series, we can only guess that he accepts to be the Dragon Reborn and actually take on this new role in his life. So, some key elements that I've picked out in the book is that Robert Jordan speaks a whole lot about duty. This traditional value that a person has an obligation to those people around them, and an obligation to the role that they play, and an obligation to his or her king or government, if you will. Less so in this book, speaking of obligation towards your government, because Rand is his own government unto himself, so to speak, because he is the Dragon Reborn. He's going to break all old oaths and make new ties. Okay, but it's often quoted in this particular book that death is lighter than a feather, but duty heavier than a mountain. and that theme kind of plays and runs through, Rand's decision making. Also with Perrin, as he kind of accepts who he is and starts to understand his importance, in helping Rand meet his objective in defeating the Dark One. Okay, so Egwene, Nynaeve, and Elaine, they all kind of meet up in the White Tower. They start learning about their powers and growing. They become friends. Min is there as well. She's the one that can read people's auras. And they're kind of seeing the White Tower in a different way. They're seeing that not all Aes Sedai are solidified together for the ultimate cause of, guiding the Dragon Reborn, to defeating the Dark One. That there's others in the White Tower that have their own objectives, and their youth, their stupidity, if you will, kind of makes them fall victim to Liandrin's ploy. And they learn through experience that they have to make up their own minds. Much as we have to do in our own lives. We got to make up our own minds of what we're going to do, who we're going to believe, and who we're not going to believe. But at the onset, Egwene, Elaine, and Nynaeve, they learn a very valuable lesson, is not to trust everybody, that they have to still be guarded even in the White Tower. And it's, beautiful city, even though they're trying to shape the lives of kings and queens, the people in the White Tower of the Emerald Seat, that there's still those people that have their own objectives, their own goals for themselves and their own order. So, great learning lesson there. Okay. Egwene, turns out she gets to be caught by the Sheikah. We get to meet the Sheikah for the first time in this book. And she doesn't like what happens. She gets enslaved. I don't know how long, maybe a week or 2 weeks, maybe it's a little bit longer. But she gets spurned and she gets upset and angry by the Sheikah, and she's in a position of weakness and she does not like it. And she vows that, once she's free, she'll never ever be enslaved again, be taken up as a demand, I don't know how to pronounce that word, by the Sheikah. So in essence, her spirit gets resolved towards being independent. And Nynaeve, she's trying to help out along with Min and Elaine, and they don't fully experience what Egwene does, but they still also hate the Sheikah. And I think that's also going to run throughout the rest of the story, okay? I think that's going to play a part as to what happens. The Sheikah are going to be the enemies. Egwene, Elaine, and Nynaeve, they certainly are not going to do anything that the Sheikah want to do. So politically, that could be setting some things up for the future stories. Again, Robert Jordan's a clean writer. I didn't see any bad language. He's relatively straightforward. There's a lot of tongue-in-cheek humor that goes on between the guys and girls. The women call the men woolheads and things like that, and the women or the men think that the women are weak and need to be protected, and that's far from the truth. But they're young. The men are young. They're learning. They're growing, and they're trying to understand this world around them as well as the people that they're interacting with. And I think Robert Jordan plays around with that, and I found that quite funny. But the action is good. It moves fast-paced. As I said in the first book, the first book, I think Robert Jordan has a real talent for writing about action scenes. He gets wordy at times, a little slow at times, but I think that's intentional. I think he wants a direct difference between the pacing of his books from the action scenes to the non-action scenes. He wants us to feel perhaps that longing, that waiting that's going to be happening, as well as the characters are as they're anxious about getting the Horn of Valere or getting freed from the Sheikah. I think that's deliberate. He wants us to be like, okay, let's get this thing going. I'm excited. I want to know what's going on. I don't know. I hope you liked the book. I sure did. Tell me your thoughts. If you have a favorite character, I'm always interested to read about that. If you've liked the novel so far, or liked the series, what you think about the endings, I don't know, whatever comes to your mind, I'm curious. Wouldn't know what you think about it. All right, take care.